hosting and moderating this panel, which is world building in horror games. And I'm going to have my amazing panelists come and introduce themselves because they are all awesome horror creators in their own right. So I'm going to start here because I know you are totally ready to go.
All right. So hi everybody. I'm Rick Heinz. I write things about dead things and sarcastic books about the end of the world. If you've ever heard of Geek and Sundry, I did all the GM tips with Matt Mercer and the whole article series for about 3 years. I also wrote Red Opera, Last Days of the Warlock, like the Black Ballad. I did the official Crow RPG. I've been writing for Shadowrun Cyberpunk, a bunch of different game companies for years, but I also do horror novels and other types of scary, spooky things.
Hi, I'm Jason Keech. I mostly publish on Drive-Thru. I've been making role-playing games since 1990s. My most popular one is based off of the SCP universe, if you know what that is. And I primarily focus on modern horror and role-playing.
Hi everyone, I'm Jess Geyer. I've been an indie game creator for only a few years, since right before the pandemic in 2018, but I've written for a lot of other people's games. And I'm also the president of the Indie Game Developer Network, so I've seen a lot of people's horror games, and my type of horror is typically the horror that you exist in currently in your day-to-day life.
My name is Matthew Orr. I'm co-owner of Wet Ink Games. We make, we have like about half of the stuff that we publish is like horror mixed with a historical setting. So that's probably the most experience that I'll be bringing here. I've always said I'm not really a horror guy, so but yet I said yes to being here, so maybe I am.
You're a horror guy.
Okay, all right,
horror guy.
here I am.
And I am also a freelance writer and developer. I worked on Black Ballad and the Red Opera. I've also worked on a whole bunch of other stuff, including Never Going Home, which is why I'm not a horror person. You just don't realize it. And a bunch of other things for Vampire Edition, for Black Void. I've written on a whole bunch of things. And so I'm going to get our panel started. And the first thing that I want to ask you guys, well, first I want to poll the audience, because I want to know why you guys are actually specifically here. Are you guys GMs looking to run long-term campaigns? Okay, that's about half of you. That's a good amount. Are you, as players, trying to figure out, or even just people coming to game, trying to figure out new games to play that are in the horror genre, or to turn your game into a horror game? A good handful. Okay. Is everyone else just here because they love horror? Yeah? Okay. And is there anyone here that you have something very specific in mind that you are hoping to get out of? No? Just kind of coming here to have fun too? Sweet. Okay. So what I want to talk to you guys is about what specific genres of horror you guys enjoy playing in, not writing in specifically, but playing in as players. And then why? And then maybe one game that encapsulates that.
Oh, that's a really tough question, Crystal. I love horror. I love playing in horror games. It's my absolute favorite genre to play in. And I really, really like to play an Eldritch horror style game, because if it's done right, it hits all the creepiness factors that you don't necessarily always get when you're just reading a story about it. And then when you're, if you watch a movie that's Eldritch horror, sometimes that can get a little oh, I see the monster now, it's not so big. But when you're playing a character who's slowly being driven into madness by these creatures from beyond the cosmos, that's the best. Is there the only game that I've played that I've really, really enjoyed that has done this, that is not a LARP, is a homebrew game that I played in Michigan. So that's not very helpful to any of you to give you a recommendation. But my other favorite horror game is Monster of the Week, which is the total other end of the stick, where we have, you get a lot of campy horror. It's a great Powered by the Apocalypse game too. Totally recommend.
So you did this thing where you said not horror games you like to play, but not write in.
Yep.
And
And
that
you were
is
right.
Right, yeah.
tricky question to answer. So the horror game that I would like to, or that I played in and that I enjoy playing that I don't write about, is actually straight, completely mundane level, American Psycho level, like society, no magic, no monsters, nothing like this, but just being forgotten in your day-to-day life of society, and the unwinding psychological horror as you, like, things devolve around you. And because it's I don't know, it's just one step to the left of our society, and I like that bit. And the game that I played that I got a chance to do that with, and I will probably mention it 10,000 freaking times in this panel, is because I absolutely love the Dread game system and the Ten Candles game systems. And there are these one-shots that people have run that don't have the monsters or the supernatural because the players defined them. And it's just, you know, the creepy stalker who's always at your door looking in and follows you from day after day after day. Love that shit.
I usually focus on modern horror mostly because, like, compared to fantasy, modern day environments are easier to get immersed into because you already know what the world is like. So it's like the closer you are to being in the shoes of your character, the easier it is to be immersed into the world. So that's why I usually focus on modern horror. And the games I usually play, me and my friends do a lot of homebrew stuff. We used to play a game in the early 2000s based off of the Resident Evil universe, which was a blast. So hopefully that answers the question.
I think for me, like, the ones that have really gotten me most excited as I've been sitting and thinking about it is some of the solo games that are out there. So the two that come to mind are Doug Lewandowski's game called Below, in which you stumble into like a dark hole kind of, and you're trapped there, and you're having kind of a weird adventure there. It's like sort of Alice in Wonderland, but not really. And Doug and Banana Chan did together The Wishing Sigil, which is you're like I think of it as a Victorian workhouse game because that's the setting I played it in, but I think you can play it in other settings. Anyway, that idea of play to fail is something that I like a lot. So then when it's a solo game where it's only me, that's like, I'm going to play this character to fail, and like, that's the spirit of the game, because you're writing about being trapped in a hole and having to deal with all of the like fear and exploration and failure to get out and all that kind of stuff in Below. That's probably gets me the most excited. So those are some games there.
And personally, I love like existential dread horror. It could be eldritch horror, it could be real life horror. But I just love that feeling of not knowing what is actually affecting you, whether it's real or supernatural. And I think one of the coolest games that I have played is Bluebeard's Bride. And if you have not played it, first off, the art is absolutely gorgeous. But it is fairy tale feminist horror. And it's based off of the actual retelling of Bluebeard's Bride. And I absolutely love it. Every time I've played it, it has been so amazing. So, my next question. I'm actually going to go, and I want to kind of break down a campaign into a long form campaign and how you would do that, and then like smaller chunks of it. That way everyone kind of gets a big picture first, and then we can kind of go into the nitty gritty of things. So when it comes to overall like multiple sessions, like slasher flicks and stuff like that all end with like a whole bunch of people dying. And so that doesn't really work well for an overall campaign. But how would you take something, and I know like Alien does this pretty well, but how would you take something to still give that horror slasher feel, but make it a longer campaign?
So I guess I'll go first, unless you got something. All right. So long form campaigns are a thing that is very, very near and dear to my heart, because that is primarily what I write, right? And the one thing that I find of taking anything creepy and horror and trying to turn it into a perpetual story that you're going to play, 10, 15, 20 sessions for, is your players have to have a sense of loss and permanence, something that is beyond death. whether it's body horror and injury or problem that they're dealing with that is a recurring thing that might perpetually get worse until you bring up to that bigger climax at the end. Take away your character's memories. Have them lose parts of themselves, or because you don't want to take all the players out of the game completely, so you don't want your party dropping like flies unless there's some sort of like death come back or like possession mechanic in the campaign that you're doing with that. So to take any game, even if it's running D&D's Plains of Pandela or like Out of the Abyss or the basic campaigns that people generally get, if you just in your brain when you sit on down say, hey, I'm going to have the players lose something of permanence or something affect them permanently throughout the campaign every time they fail, and have that slowly build up, when you reach your climax, you can start having that murder go. But if you're going to run a long form campaign, make sure you include comedy. Have that break session. You can't just keep building perpetual tension for 20 sessions straight. You have to have...
That was my next question.
All right.
No, you said a lot of what I was going to say. You do have to make sure, because in the horror genre, death is the end of the horror for that character. You have to have, there has to be something beyond that. And you can't just be killing off your characters the entire time unless you're playing a game like Die Laughing, but that's the point of that game. If you pick the right system, you can get a game where, the characters die and then they become part of the GM team. Die Laughing is one of those games. And I think there's a couple others, but of course, whenever I try to remember games, they leave my head. But like you said, what are they trying to protect? And what kind of ending are they going to get in the end? Because a lot of horror is preventing the worst ending. And that can be really hard to do. So thinking about what's the best possible ending for this campaign for the characters? What's the absolute worst for everyone? And then they could fall anywhere within those parentheses. And their whole goal should be to, like, how can we not have this happen? Even something pretty horrible is better than this. So whether that's the end of the world entirely, or the complete destruction of your own humanity, or your body being snatched, whatever that ends up being, all of those are, or corporations taking over your world and making you all corporate drones, whatever that is. You want to make sure that you're building your horror with that all in mind. That's also going to help you cascade a lot of your other your other problems for your characters. The monsters could be themed around, okay, it's apocalyptic. Well, what kind of apocalypse is it? Like, here are my monsters that are going to be in the apocalypse. They're going to keep popping up. You're going to keep building up that horror until, are you going to stop it? That's the best as a player too for me. So
I think I'd like to echoing on what people say, I agree. But I think the twist that I would put to it, which works in the game I published, Never Going Home. Never Going Home is World War I horror setting, and it was mentioned you take these things away from your players. In Never Going Home, I mean, you can be a mean GM and throw a bunch of monsters at them and kill them if you want, but that's not the long form campaign. The thing that makes that game really good is the players can choose when to give up their cards to get the game effects that they want. There's a narrative tension because you don't want to give up the cards narratively, because that means you're burning yourself out as a human to survive in this corrupted version of World War I. Obviously, you get the mechanical benefits for discarding the card, but you don't want to do it, but you want to do it, but you don't want to do it. So making it the player choice to give up, not just take it away from them as the GM, but let them give it up, and then so that long-term story about like how wrecked are we by the end has been their decision, and they will make worse choices than you will almost all of the time.
Universally so, 100%.
Rick was saying he focuses more on long-term campaigns. I do as well. I don't really do one-shots unless it's a very specific situation. I do like to focus on longer campaigns because players will get more attached to their characters. And there's a saying I always say is that the best horror comes from when players are immersed into the world, they're attached to their characters, and then you put them into a situation they don't fully understand and are not prepared to handle. So I like to incorporate backstories like you should, And the more you make the characters attached to the world and attached to their characters, the more they're going to fear death. Another trick I do is don't tell players right away that it's a horror campaign. That way, when the horror does come, it's all the more shocking.
So I run a lot of horror games for conventions. And one of the things that I do is I make the scenario to be pretty intense for the characters, but I do like, let's make a deal, so that they actually have to give up parts of themselves in order to solve the mystery. I want, as a convention runner, or convention game runner, I want my players to throw as much of their sheet at me as they possibly can, because one, as a game designer, I'm trying to break my own systems. And I'm trying to find new and fun ways to play around with mechanics. But two, I want them to have an experience of either overwhelming odds or really cool stories about how their character died. And so, like, I ran several sessions, and one session I was like, oh my god, this happened. And it was really, really cool, and the players absolutely loved it. And they're like, that was the most intense game we have played all the con. And I was like, that's great. And then for long-term one, I like the slow burn, where you are picking and choosing what parts to get, or what parts that characters can give up and when. So I still like that let's make a deal thing, but it's very, very sporadic and occasional in a long-form campaign. And the characters may not even realize just how much of their character they've given away over a campaign until it's too late. And then they're like, oh, I don't have this thing anymore. Oh no.
That's like what you were saying about the point of, like, not necessarily even comedic points, but there's always a point in a story where you reflect back on, like, you have the foil to the original state. So where, like, you have to have the moment where they look how far we've come, for better or for worse. And that's part of the horror genre too, even though that's a downslope in the intensity. But like you said, you need those moments for the intensity to really shine.
Yep. And that's actually going to be my next question, which is that when you're slowly building horror and stuff like that, your brain can only take so much at a time before it just kind of checks out and all of a sudden it's no longer horrific. Now it's just run of the mill. It's the, oh look, what is our bingo card today? You know, and so as people who run campaigns, write campaigns and stuff like that, how do you build in those moments of, it can not just be comedy either, there are other ways to kind of release that tension before you build it up again. How do you guys go about that when you are running games, designing games, and even like as players?
Somebody else go first this time.
I think horror and comedy are like two flavors that I get that lots of people like them together, but I'm less excited by them together. But I like more of like a moment of pathos or like sympathy. So the image that comes to mind real quick is not really a horror movie. Again, maybe I'm not a horror guy, but anyway, in the movie The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, at near the end, the Blondie character gets there's a guy and he gives him like a cigarette, and the guy takes like one puff before he dies, right? Because it's set in the Civil War, and then he takes the dead guy's poncho, and that's how he becomes the man with no name, whatever, spoilers. But that like one little moment of like humanity, of that like exchange of like, here's a guy that's gonna die, I'm gonna give him a cigarette and he's gonna die. But that shows something about like, it's that break moment from the horror of like the gun duels and the war that they were in that thing. And so I like a lot of those in a game where you encounter someone that's like, you have a moment to offer sympathy to someone that you've met in the context of the horror game, that like you take a moment to breathe and like, yeah, maybe like Jason is still chasing you or whatever, but like we're gonna have this more human, more small scale moment to like have that moment of reflection to remind ourselves of the humanity. And then like, okay, that scene is over now, we're back on the bus, and oh, he's under the bus or whatever, like it's some sort of like you move from one flavor to another, but it doesn't always have to be comedy, I think, is for me.
Yeah, you can mix up the genres and do a session that's just most action focused. You can kind of switch up just basically what your campaign is about, and then when you do bring in horror, it's going to have That's one thing I usually do is I just don't tell people I'm playing a horror campaign, and I just throw horror at them in a unexpected spot, and see where that goes.
So, in terms of specific details, beyond just breaking tension with comedy, there's a lot of things when you're telling and writing a game, or even your storytelling in the game, you want your players to be able to experience. Now, all of us in this room, as far as I can tell, still need to breathe air, drink water, eat food, and have human moments. And your 5 senses are critical in storytelling, both in writing and in narrative and gameplay. So when you're in a spaceship, or you're having your horror scenarios, or you're in purgatory, or whatever the case may be, play some music. That's a reprieve. Describe your characters eating the muffin they kicked out of the vending machine, and they get the chance to have that sweetness. But actually go the detail to describe the pleasure of something that everybody at the table can relate to. And hopefully, if you know your party, and even if you're at a convention, you can just cold read by what drinks and beverages people brought to the table. Using specific food elements also triggers memory in people. And that is very, very important when we talk about immersion in horror. By when you describe smell, taste, hearing, it evokes old memories that are, kind of subconscious within us, that bring you back to a place of calm, but also arm you with, when you let that player describe what they think of and things like that, give you hooks to play with later, based on your genre of horror, all the way from freaking splatterpunk to psychological killer.
The players will tell you what they don't want to experience.
Right.
They will. Yeah.
Which I know Crystal's going to have a horror and consent part in a part of this later, so I'm not even going to go there yet.
I don't want is in quote.
Right.
They want to.
They want it, but they don't want
give
it.
you the tools to.
Oh yeah, no,
No,
me and spiders. Nope.
You guys are maybe a little nicer than I am. My favorite thing to do when I'm running a horror game is to give the players a moment to plan. And they're like, oh, what are you gonna do? And they come up with, you know what your players do. They come up with the most elaborate plans. They come up, oh, this is foolproof. It'll definitely work. I'm thinking of the movie It Follows, where they set up the swimming pool scene, right? And you as a viewer and the characters in the scene, they think this is gonna do it. This is going to work. And you let them have that moment of oh yes, success. And then you bring them right back to the horror because you're evil and you're the GM and that's what you're going to do. Let them have the moment of pathos to oh, we finally defeated the evil bad guy. But you've been listening to their plan all along, and while you're listening to their plan all along, you're going to use that against them in some horrifying way. The same thing goes with when you're giving them the moments where they're oh, here's our plans for the future. I love you, you're my best friend, and you're gonna be taking notes the entire time. Because even in those moments of downtime, unless you're playing a comedy horror game, in which case maybe a lot of the comedy is the horror, they're going to start really worrying anytime you are taking a little light. Oh, you're having a nice happy time right now. What's next? You want to kind of keep them, you always want them to remember that, yeah, you're playing a horror game. This is not a happy fun time until I say it's happy fun time. Yeah, but I don't know. Those things sound nice that you guys are.
No, that is absolutely diabolical. And the whole letting your players sit quiet and when they're planning to do their thing, while you're oh yes, diabolical, and I love it. I need to play one of your games.
One of the things that I learned, I worked at a haunted house for many, many, many years. And one of the things I learned about haunted houses is that because they're so short, they throw sensory thing after sensory thing after sensory thing into it. It's a sensory overload. And that's actually the horror that's in there. It's not the jump scares. Those will scare you. But if it wasn't for the music blasting and the fog and the strobe lights and the dark lighting and everything like that, it would not have the impact that it does. And one of the things that I learned is that over long session campaigns, you have to pick and choose when you sensory overload. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to play around with different senses. The 10 candles mechanic, by the way, I wish I would have thought of that because I use candles a lot, and I'm so angry I didn't. I learned from, my best friend's dad is a dentist, and he actually he told me the smell of the dentist office is actually clove oil. And so if you open clove oil in a room and just let it sit and permeate, we had a Little Shop of Horrors, like dentist scene, and he did that, and people would freak out and be like, nope, it smells like a dentist office, I'm out. And like they didn't even start the scene yet, and they were out because of the smell. And so like just small things like that, learning the smells of things. Like Disney has a very specific smell, and they pump that into the park. Like learning those things can bring both levity and also like sensory overload. But again, you have to make sure your players can handle that, because not everybody handles sensory overload very well, which is why like haunted houses aren't for everybody. So, all right, my next question is going to be tone and theme. So when you are trying to set up a game, a campaign, how do you look at the tone of what you want to tell for like even each game session, but also like the theme? And theme, by the way, is like loose. There could be multiple themes going on in a game, so you don't have to focus on one. You can just kind of figure out how you decide or what you want to include. So who would like to go first?
Theme is so important. And that's the thing that's like the best about playing a horror game is the embodiment of a theme when you're in a character. And there are so many themes to choose from in whatever kind of horror genre you like, because, for example, Alien, what's that about? Well, it's about a lot of things. It's about pregnancy, and it's about assault, and it's about closed spaces, and it's about being in outer space. It's about so many different things, and you have to be really careful with that with certain players. You have to really be careful about what those themes mean for them. And again, I know we're going to get into safety, but I just wanted to announce that it's a tricky thing and you have to really pick apart and unravel it to make sure that everybody is comfortable, especially if you're going to then place it with a tone that's going to clash later too. Alien versus the scene in Evil Dead, very different, and one of them I don't like. I don't like that scene in Evil Dead with the tree. I love Alien because of the tone. The theme is the same.
So the perils for all of my friends is they know I'm a writer and an author and a game runner, and usually my themes are always, for when I'm running and storytelling, are usually picked to the stuff that I'm going to write, right? It's going to be sort of this urban fantasy horror about losing your humanity, and conspiracy is a big aspect of my type of horror. Or it's going to be, memory loss. What does it mean to die? What does it mean to transition? What unresolved trauma might you have? And that's going to be usually my RPG line horror. And so when people come to my house, or I invite people to my table, they already probably know that they're going to get one of these two vibes. It's very rare that I will be like, oh, I'm going to come to your play group and I'm going to inflict my horror upon you. I'm going to let you come and be like, oh yeah, this is what I want to try. I want to see Rick run a game, and I want to play this thing that he's doing. Whether it be memory loss or like that, because Memento is one of my favorite movies, and so I like playing around with the psychological stuff. So that's kind of how I pick a lot of my themes, I guess, for the game. Is I do this for a living. My brain is nuts. I work in construction and have cockroaches crawl over me, and so my mind goes in strange places, and thus I'm a writer.
I hope there's no wrong answers to this question, because when I come up with themes, I usually do that at the start when I come up with NPCs and enemies. I try to get in the mind of the characters that I'm making, and what types of situations they're going to be put in with the players. And then that's usually when I do my theme brainstorming, I guess. When I want to make maps and such, I will obviously incorporate the themes into those, but I don't really have outline of my theme until I start getting to the actual characters and how they're going to interact.
Yeah, sometimes theme doesn't come out until second draft.
Yeah, I think I just talked about being like the hellscape in which we live. I think that for me is sort of like the theme. Like any horror game or any horror media that I appreciate is like, oh, I can identify that the theme of this is war is bad, or the theme of this is don't do a racism. Like there are very basic like lessons, I think, to horror things, and then all of the like dripping blood and bats flying out of things and like people being chopped up and stuff like that are all like built on the very basic like when I consume this like media about these things that have happened, like what I'm supposed to learn from them is the very basic theme of maybe don't do genocide, you know, like and so I think that's how when I can identify that, right? I'm like, what was this movie about? Oh, it was one of these very basic like lessons. So then, and that's sort of like a working backwards then, right? It's sort of like that's a scaffold that you can do, right? So like, as just mentioned Alien, right? I mean, it's about it's about body horror, but it's not really about body horror. It's about like men writing a movie about like what if a man got impregnated by an alien, you know, it's like, there is a theme there that is being explored, and then so that can serve as a not that you have to, don't be too didactic about it, but I think that it has an impact, right, when you have like something to say with your media or your game or your expression, you know. So I think that's kind of I don't know, that's what I have to say about it.
I mean, that's going to come out for different people and your players too differently too.
Sure.
I feel like horror is the most argued about genre when it comes to what is this movie about.
Yeah.
Even the directors will argue with the fans about, no, that's not what my movie was about, and they'll be like, no, it absolutely was about this.
Sure, I mean, you can disagree about what that theme is, but I think you connect to that kind of baseline theme. Like, you connect through the tropes of the genre to like a something that is meaningful, you know. And maybe that's just how people connect with media generally, but
yeah,
I think it's yeah.
I'm not saying your players should argue with you about it. I'm just saying that they're gonna get unexpected things out of it. They're gonna do unexpected things. They're gonna get unexpected things out of it.
I think one of the things that I really like about both theme and tone is that it is interpreted differently by how everybody perceives everything at the table, and everybody perceives everything differently. And so what you think is the theme could be something completely different than what most of your table thinks is the theme. And that's not bad. That's not a bad thing. It's only bad when it ends up with clashing play styles. And then that's kind of something that you guys have to work out as a table. And then tone, I love describing horror. I love body horror, and I forget that not everybody understands or likes that. And so like I start describing things, and then I start seeing people like turn pale, and I'm like, that's not that bad. And I'm like, oh, I need to tone myself down. And so like I have to be super aware, especially like if I don't know people at the table. I'm super like hyper aware of how I'm describing things, because my tone can be extremely intense, especially for people who don't know me. And to balance that, like with humor and stuff like that, I generally don't bring a ton of humor, but I let the players at the table actually bring the humor instead. So their players might do silly, goofy things to try and solve this, and that brings the levity to the table. I bring the horror and the setting, and they bring the levity and the parts where like they're like, oh, that was really funny. So that's kind of how I try to balance all of that out to allow players some of that. Okay, this is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Okay, I actually want to talk about, now that we've kind of led up to a whole like sort of campaigning and setting and stuff like that, session 0. And with your players, how are you setting up things as a GM running a session 0? Do you run a session 0? And what do you guys include with that?
I love session zeros. They are like my favorite thing of all time. there is never a time where I'm not running the session zero, whether there be private one-on-one sessions where none of the other players know what everybody's at the table, but I like the group ones. And I've gotten to the point where I now use other RPGs, particularly a lot of indie RPGs, and sometimes even systems of our own, to run the session zero as a setup for the campaign using probably a larger, bigger rule set. For the Black Ballot, for example, I now use a purgatory poker system where everybody is dead and they sit on down at the table and they gamble their characters' memories for a chance at resurrection, but nobody at the table knows who these characters are. And so they're actually telling and writing their backstory while they're gambling and playing a deck of cards collaboratively at the table and sharing their secrets. And then there's gonna be a hook at the end that they don't know about when one person wins the hand, but that's the end of the session zero. And I will use 10 Candles, I will use Dread, I will use just a ton of like indie RPG one-shot horror things where people can make as one-shot horror games and indie ones are really good about who's your character core, who's your concept, what's your story, and then when the session zero is done, using that thing to set the tone theme for what we're going to do larger, then go fill out your character sheets for your Legend of the Five Rings, your Shadowrun 6th edition, whatever game system we're going to be happen to play, and then we enter the longer form campaign, which also allows me to later on, if I secretly work in that mechanic for a horror bit, it's going to conjure that up session zero later on down the line.
Yeah, session zero is so important too, not only for your planning as a GM, but also to establish things like tone. Like if you don't want your players to go down the super goofy route, which players always end up doing at least a little bit because they're friends sitting around a table having fun, the longer you play, the sillier they'll get. But like if you wanted to run a really serious game, the session zero is the time to say that, setting those expectations. It's also really important to make sure that you're not hitting on any themes that, or subject matters that are going to actually make your players uncomfortable in the bad way and not just the good way. So like, for example, if you're really afraid of spiders and you don't want to have them described to you at all, the session zero is the time to say that. There are a lot of really great safety mechanics. One of the safety mechanics that I really liked for a horror game was actually in Home. There's a card with a bunch of possible topics, and you check them off. You go like, here's my, I don't want this. let me put this not in there, and then we can all make sure, because it's a GM-less game, we can all make sure that we're not going to include those things in the game. There are like so many other great safety tools out there too, but also don't forget to do the topics that people do want in there. The topics that you want in there are important as a GM because you're running the game. To be honest, you're going to be doing the most of the labor if you're running a game. So you should be playing a game that you like with themes that you like. So telling the players what to expect, what you want, and then asking them what they would like, whether directly or indirectly through your conversations and the in-game creation. I love creating, for horror especially, creating the characters together at the table and having people talk it out. That also kind of gives you the idea too of what do the players want to see. But yeah, horror can be so squicky. So like the safety tools, I cannot emphasize enough, are a necessity. Otherwise you will be having a very short campaign because somebody will walk out.
We still have 2 panels then.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you guys want to say so.
I'll say that what I usually focus on with session zero, specific to horror, is power level of the characters mechanically. Set the expectations so that they know how strong their characters are going to be moving forward. And I mean, horror is going to require some level of nerfed characters to some degree. So having the expectation of the players know that.
I'm on the opposite of that
Yeah,
one.
I was going to say not always.
Yeah.
A good example is the movie Aliens, where the players are the Marines and they're extremely powerful, and the horror still comes because the enemy is too powerful. So you can kind of play around with power level expectations in players. You can have them start off extremely weak, going up against something minorly powerful, or you can have them feel like, you know, a big badass, and then throw something at them that is insurmountable.
I think the importance, like, just again, I think the so much has been said already. That's great. Yeah, safety tools thing we're going to talk about later. But I think it's. I believe in I don't believe in spoilers. I believe in a separation, in keeping the being explicit. Like, player knowledge is different than character knowledge. Mm-hmm. So as players, that's what session 0 is for. What is this tone going to be? How silly are we going to get? How powerful are we going to get? This is a discussion of the players, and this is player knowledge. Great. We've all agreed on that. We all agreed on where this game is going, how we're going to structure it. We know what we're doing. Great. Now your characters don't know any of that. So you have to play, you get to play your character within the bounds that you've set as a player. So I like to think of it that way, where it's like, some people are like, oh, but if we know what's going to happen, you were talking about, like, they don't know the twist that's coming, like, there is value to that. But I think that there's almost as much value, if not more value, in, like, and then after we've done all that, what if we do this? And people are like, yes, let's do that. Okay, great. Our characters don't know that. So now you're all able to push toward the goal that you've all agreed as players to tell the story that you've agreed to tell. And that's session, put it all in session 0, agree to everything, and then you can have an agreement that you're going to do it, and you can all, players and characters, be working together toward the goals that you set as players.
I really like session 0s, mostly because it gives players the opportunity to both collaborate before you start playing, but also for you to kind of see how they're playing and collaborating. As a GM, you do kind of have to get good at cold reading people, or just reading people in general. If you're playing with your friends, it's going to be a little bit different than if you're playing at a convention. But it gives you, like, a good feel for how the rest of a long-term campaign is going to go if everybody is communicating and establishing a way to openly communicate, especially if you set down ground rules for things like disagreements at the table. Okay, because that's a lot of times that's when people quit, is there's a disagreement at the table, it cannot be resolved, one person walks out.
I can't believe you didn't back me up when we went and attacked the town guard. It's like, you're dumb for going and doing that.
Okay, so I am gonna, this is gonna be my last specific question for the panel, and then I'm gonna open it up to questions from the audience. So I'm gonna give you guys a chance to kind of think if you guys have any questions. And that is the safety mechanic. I kind of waited until the end to kind of establish everything. And that is because safety mechanics are super important. And I feel like people kind of like, well, I game with my friends. I don't need safety mechanics. That's fine. If you game with your friends and you know your friends, I'm not telling you have to use things. I'm saying that there are tools and resources out there for you to make players comfortable if you are not sure, like, you know, if you are not super familiar with them, or if you are familiar with them, but you're like, hey, my friends are all adults and they have things that are going on in their life and they're not talking about stuff right now. I want to give them this in case I bring something up that is actually super horrible for them, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And so I want to open it up as to, what do you guys use for safety mechanics? What do you guys recommend? How do you guys feel about them?
I already said a little bit about it. Because for me, safety tools in session 0 are like the same. Like, you're doing that during your session 0, and everything you're doing in your session 0 is about the safety of the game. And like I said, horror can be really, really squicky, and it covers a lot of, like, the reason I like horror is that I can kind of have a catharsis with some of the things that make me really uncomfortable. My favorite movies make me really uncomfortable, and my favorite games do too. The safety tool that I use every single time are lines and veils, and I like to anonymize them. So if I have time, there will be a Google form, or if not, we have cards, and I have the players write on the cards their lines, things that we will not talk about, they will not come up in the game, and then veils, things that we'll fade to black on. So, for example, really descriptive body horror. Some people are okay with a little body horror, but not a lot. And like having that kind of explicitly for like, here's a veil, body horror. Yeah, you can have it in there, just no description. Whereas a line would be none at all.
Yeah, please no body horror.
Yeah, please no. But you are also allowed as a GM to say, we will include this topic in the game, and if you can't handle that, this is not the game for you, and that's totally okay to do, especially in a horror game. But when you're at a convention, they're coming to you for a purpose, right? Like they want to come play the horror game. If you're bringing a horror game to your friends who you don't usually play horror with, that might be a difficult conversation to have with a couple players. Like, hey, maybe for the next 6 weeks, this is not. You got to find something else to do on your Fridays, and just continuing to check in as well, because setting up the safety tool to start is not the end all be all. You have to, like at the end of the session, make sure you're kind of getting a read for how people are doing when something really horrific comes up. Obviously, you don't want to break the tension, but continuing to pay attention. And you can also take one of the LARP mechanics, which is just a quick like little symbol, not breaking any characters, like I'm okay, or like or like no, like literal hand signals so people can keep talking. And that way, if someone's like sobbing openly at your table, you don't want to stop and ask, like, are you doing okay? You can just like go like this, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm fine, it's great. They can just like give you a signal, and that's great. And that works really well just for horror in general.
I'm like you in a lot of these things. I also use a bit lines and veils, and it's interesting when you have players at the table when during session 0. One person may really want hardcore body horror, and the other person may never want it even described. For me, one thing that's kind of unique is I know I will either, when I drop a veil for the table, because there's one person who doesn't want it, but I know there's somebody who does, I will later write a side scene or side role play for that particular player that wanted to see behind the veil in a different environment, right? I do a lot of the LARP because I'm an old school Vampire the Masquerade LARPer, so you know the yes, no to fade to black. So I'm always watching the room for the tables when I'm describing a particularly tense scene, and I instantly know when to fade to black and do stuff. But by the time that we're getting to the high tension parts, I kind of have a feel for it. But you asked a question about how we feel about safety tools. Yes, I'm a huge advocate, but the internet community and largely most gamers don't understand this. It's a hot topic issue of, I don't want to play with safety tools at the table. But here's a really cool reason why you do it. Because safety tools aren't just setting up the boundaries of no's, but they are also setting up the yeses. I hate spiders. I am an arachnophobic through and through. But I will tell the storyteller, go ahead and play with spiders and go ahead and play with body horror, because my friends who know me will purposely avoid that in real life. They will guard me from going near spiders. They will tell me to just look away or shoo me out of a room sometimes. And I have no idea why, because they're protecting me. But when I'm at the table, I get to say, no guys, this is okay. Like you said with the catharsis,
yeah.
I will go watch Arachnophobia as an arachnophobic.
Oh, that's one of my favorite movies, and I am also. So good.
There's a reason for that, and because then when you find out what themes everybody's really into, it also gives you the storyteller completely greenlit to go back and write post-session 0 of I have all of these things I can use. And you just lean into what you know is going to work best for your table. And once you have those keys in your hand, you're set up for a great freaking game at that point. And everybody's going to have a blast. But just leaning into yes, enthusiastic consent is like the coolest freaking thing ever. So.
And I would say also, specific to horror, it's good that as a GM, storyteller, you read the room, even if you have consent for certain things. For example, I had a long-running campaign in which I killed an NPC that was dear to the players, and I think I described the gruesome death in a little too much detail, because one of the players actually kind of felt like dropping out after that, and I felt a little bad because I get it, because it's, I had such good immersion that they really cared about this character, and it was horror. But you can cross the line even if you aren't even if you know the audience, you think you know the audience.
So yeah, Echoes. How do I feel about it? I like them. They're great. You should use them. The term that nobody said yet is in Microscope, which is a great world building activity / game. It calls it the palette. So like what you put on the palette is stuff that comes up in the game, because that's analogous to painting with a painting, and what you take off the palette doesn't show up. So that term of like build your palette for the game you want to play. The other thing that I want to say is if you don't know what a safety tool is and you want to learn about them, go to ttrpgsafetytoolkit.com. And I looked it up. ttrpgsafetytoolkit.com is a website put together by Kiana Shaw and Lauren Bryant Monk, and they're all there. Like all the many dozens that exist have all been categorized. You just download the document. There explains them, uses them. That's where you can get. It's a ground zero if you don't. Or first stop, not ground zero. First stop if you need to pick up some and put that into your game. So.
One of the coolest safety mechanics that I've seen is in the role-playing game RPG Nasty, where you can say, I don't want to see this, but you can also describe a scene in horror detail as long as everyone at the table is okay with it, where you want to see that happen. So you get I don't want to see this, but I totally want to see this. And then that happens throughout the story. So.
No eyeballs, but there is a hydraulic press in the factory.
Yes. All right. So we have a couple questions. In order for time and stuff like that, I'm just going to have like one or two panelists. So if you do have a specific question for a specific panelist, please let me know which panelists you'd like them to answer. That way we can use as many questions as possible. So, does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Anyone. Like balancing the fact that like in a lot of games this is like power fantasy for people, but in horror like you don't want them to like just mow over a monster, like sort of dealing with that balance.
I would let them mow over the monster and then play with the consequences of them doing with that, and just like make that. And don't worry so much about here's the dice mechanics and the hit points, and they got their power mower and whatnot. Killing a monster and mowing it over in a horrible fashion, and then hey, they beat your big bad, but what don't they know? Remember, your players are ignorant of what is behind your screen.
I just have a question about how you manage morale at a table. I think you kind of touched on this, where sometimes you can sort of get to a line, or because of the way that the random nature of dice rolling, right? And for instance, I ran a Mothership game once, which is known for its lethality and has tables where you don't always control the outcome, where a player got into a really bad situation and then it stopped being fun, right? And so how do you manage that? And I think, like, what is your opinion on kind of fudging the rules or negotiating at the table to say, okay, maybe we're not going to make this as bad, so you can still be engaged that way, or if you just say this is the consequence of horror and we're going to just ride that out?
I usually have I try to do the most realistic simulation I can in a game. So if the players mow over a monster or the monster mows over the players, I kind of let it happen as much as I can, but I do fudge things if I can tell it's not being fun anymore.
Right.
But again, trying to have the most realistic outcome in any situation is what I usually aim for, because then it really does feel real.
Right.
All right. In being respectful to the next panel, if you do have questions, please come out to the hallway. I will at least be out there. If panelists can stay, that's awesome. Otherwise, if you are staying, please stay in the hall. Otherwise, please out exits so that the next panel can get going. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.